Good morning. My name is Amber Burnette. It's a delight and an honor to spend this time with you this morning. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our presenting sponsor, US Bank, for their support of this series, and to thank you, our members, for making teaching, learning, research, and exploration possible. Your generosity truly helps us all together create a world where everyone can use the power to use science to make lives better. I want to give you just a quick background of myself this morning before we get going. I get to work at the Museum Experiences Division here at the museum, and I celebrated my 3-year anniversary, so that's kind of exciting. And I am a self-described bird nerd, which means I pretty much will look for any excuse to go chase anything with feathers. We are kicking off week 1 of Member Appreciation Month with some super cool topics to share with you. Our talk today will focus on birding in winter. And since we just have a few minutes together, we'll fine-tune that down a bit more to birding in Minnesota in winter. Yes, it can and does happen. In fact, all of the photos that you're going to see in this presentation, I took here in Minnesota. And most of them I took just a few miles away from my house in Northeast Minneapolis. So it's real, and you can do it too. Before we move on, I want to reference the picture in this slide are cedar waxwings, and I took them in November. So I consider November winter, and actually that's kind of apt considering how our last November was. This slide, I'm going to apologize a little bit in advance. It does have a lot of text, but I promise you it's the only one that does. The reason I did that is because there's some really important points on answering kind of our big question today of why go birding in winter. Why go birding at all is where we're going to start. And one of the best reasons that I can think of is that You don't need any experience to get into this. A lot of new hobbies and interests that you engage in, you need to know something before you start or buy something before you start. And that's absolutely not true. You need curiosity and maybe developing a little bit of a passion, and that is it. You shouldn't feel intimidated because it is a journey. You're going to build as you go. So any knowledge or experience that you start with is going to be valid. I will say it's a lot of fun to do alone, but you can take family and friends with you too. They'll kind of help you as you go, and you can help each other. And that's really kind of neat because it expands what you can do with this. And all ages, absolutely. I teach here in town, and I will tell you, second graders are going to be smarter than I will ever be, even at this age. And if you engage in having some of these younger people with you, they can teach you, and that's always a lot of fun. A friend of mine in Mexico called birding an active meditation, and I think that's absolutely apt. For me, when I go out, I kind of split my brain in two. I have one side that's always listening to what the birds are in the area that I'm at, and we'll get to that in just a moment. I actually bird more with my ears than my eyes, or that I am able to see. And the health benefits of being outside, I'm sure all of you have read many, many articles, and I kind of feel like this last year that maybe holds true almost more than anything else. And that leads actually to the next couple of them. Birding is an opportunity to connect with bigger things than yourself. And if you're like me, I really have felt the isolation this past year. Somehow there's a little bit of comfort in thinking about the circle of life. The Cardinals, the Northern Cardinals here in Minnesota, don't know that COVID is going on. They actually are singing and trying to attract a mate, and they're thinking about their nesting. So that's a bigger thing than me, and I like the idea that I'm able to engage in that right now. And it leads to the last one. I think also right now we're all looking for ways to make a difference or engage in something bigger, contribute to conservation. And birding is a really great way to do that. You don't have to be a scientist, but you can be a citizen scientist. And that is really good, meaningful contributions. So it might seem a little counterintuitive to be excited about birding in winter when there are fewer birds, but there is a reason why I want to talk about that. When you have fewer birds, you actually can spend a little more time getting to know them and know them really well. A couple of really good examples are the black and white birds that you see. There's two of them. And I actually took these photos and did the graphics for our Learn from Home area on our website. There's some super great digital pieces that you can use for yourself, for your kids, and please check them out. We're always putting stuff up there. So the downy and hairy woodpeckers are birds that sometimes are pretty quick as they move from tree to tree, but if there's just a couple of them, you get to spend a little more time getting to know which ones they are. And if they move really quick, then you can focus on what you hear. And this is where I mentioned earlier about using your ears. Believe it or not, birds like the white-breasted nuthatch and the blue jay have a lot of different sounds. Once you realize that all those sounds come from just one bird, then you're going to be really ready for all the spring migrants that come to town in actually just a couple of months. Why else is birding in winter cool? Well, who can argue with how great it is to have the birds actually come to you? So in winter, resources are fewer and more concentrated, especially in Minnesota. So things like feeders really become a great opportunity for you to be able to learn birds. And now this is probably going to be more by sight, or at least I do. I look at them through my window. So these three photos I took in my backyard at feeders, and they're of three types of finches. Now, someone who hasn't spent a lot of time with finches will look at that and go, oh my goodness, brown birds. And really, if you are just watching them out in a park, big flash of brown, big flash of yellow, and that's really tough to be able to tell what they are. But if they're spending a little time at your feeder, now you have the opportunity to be able to study them a little more. The birds that are on the feeder with the green poles, the bird that's in the middle is a pine siskin, and the bird that's on the red feeder is an American goldfinch. And for some of you, that may be the first time you're thinking about American goldfinches not being that snappy lemon yellow. in the winter, our finches actually, a lot of them do stay, and they'll actually have a different plumage. Their feathers are going to look a little bit different. But don't worry, they're going to be able to attract the females and be that beautiful yellow in actually just a few months. So on the other side of the spectrum, when the birds don't come to you, you may do a little bit of driving, but you're going to see some really great stuff. So in Minnesota, it's actually kind of a club med or sandals for some birds. They breed in the Arctic. So coming into Minnesota actually affords them a little bit better opportunity to find food. So we're going to get some specialties, especially if you are willing to drive Duluth and into an area called Zaxim Bog, which is a little north of there. Then you can see some of these great birds, which I have pictures of. One is the northern hawk owl, and one is the evening grosbeak. And some of you might remember that bird being in a little more numbers than we see now. The northern shrike is that really fantastic kind of black and white bird at the top, and the rough-legged hawk. So these are specialties that you might be able to see here in Minnesota because they've actually come a little bit south, even if you have to do a little bit of driving. The other way that birding in winter really affords us some opportunities we don't get in the rest of the year is because there's less dense vegetation. So when the leaves are gone, you can actually see what's kind of going on in some of the trees. And I always tell my third graders, you don't have a driver's license yet, and that's fantastic because now you can look out the window as you're driving to Target or your grandma's house as much as you want to. And you should really take that opportunity to just see what's in the trees that you normally don't get to as soon as the leaves start popping. February, I still consider winter, but for some species here in Minnesota, that's when they're going to start thinking about nesting. So a couple of the photos here I have as examples. The great horned owl doesn't make a nest. They will use a tree cavity or a red-tailed hawk nest or a squirrel nest. And yes, they are actually probably sitting on eggs right about now. Another bird that I'm sure everyone is familiar seeing is the bald eagle. I think the Minnesota DNR Eagle Cam just came back online very recently. So a lot of eagles here in Minnesota are spending time at their nest sites. They're probably doing some light housekeeping right about now. And there are birds that are cavity nesters, like our black-capped chickadee and our woodpeckers, many of them. They are actively either excavating cavities or thinking about it. So this behavior is probably going to be pretty evident. They're spending time in a small area. And I'd like to take this opportunity to speak a little bit about ethics, which really lends itself to the social distancing that really we didn't even know we would have been doing it earlier, but this is something I'd like to encourage. When birds are nesting or breeding, this is one of the most important times in their lives. It's a huge energy draw, and it's really important that you give them lots and lots and lots of space so they don't feel that they have to defend their territory from you. They've got plenty of their own species that they've got to fend off. So please just make sure that you enjoy them, but enjoy them from a distance, and then they'll always be able to be around you to see and appreciate. All right, woohoo! Hopefully I got you super excited about going out to see birds. But the next thing that I always have people ask me is like, okay, that's great. I'd love to go see them, but where do I even begin to start? Well, I am so glad you asked. You know, when I first started birding, I will tell you that it was not easy to find a lot of resources. It is so much easier these days, and truly, technology can be your friend. I don't want to tell people that when you get outside, you have to leave all technology behind. Make it a part of your birding experience. Ebird is actually one of my absolute favorite things to use. I use it for myself, and it's an opportunity for you to put some information in that other people can use. You can get a free account. It's through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I wish these were my stats, but they're not. You now can put in all the birds that you see. This will track them for you, so you can keep a life list, a county list, a state list, which a lot of birders do. And if you decide that you are so excited about seeing a bird, you can find out where someone else is seeing it. So you can decide where you want to schedule a trip. When we can all do trips again, we can, we will, I know this. So it's a really wonderful tool that you can use for yourself, but every list that you put in is something that someone else can use too. So it's really a great tool. I highly encourage it. The Minnesota Ornithologists Union, and most states do have versions of this, is also a really great resource. They have a website, they have a listserv, they have talks and trips, and it's a really great way to get you started to either meet some people or learn some areas that other birders go birding. So I encourage that. Nature centers and refuges, many of them will put, on their website, here's what we're seeing right now. And truly, just get out. There's never a bad time to go birding. Just get out and start walking around and start seeing what you have around you. That's some of my best advice I can give you. One of the final things I want to talk about are some other citizen science projects. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning on what you can do to meaningfully contribute. I mean, I think that's really important. And birders have a great opportunity to do that. Right now, we have what's called Feeder Watch, which when you go to we have the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and Audubon. They have great websites, so you can find some resources to identify a lot of your birds. Backyard bird count is actually going to start in just a week or so. And even if you don't think you know birds that are going to be at your feeder, that's what those websites are there to help you. They really will help you decide, was that a house finch? Was that a purple finch? I think that was a sharp-shinned hawk. It might be a Cooper's hawk. There's people that really want you to engage in this, and they've put together some great resources. You can load some apps on your phone. I have the Merlin app, which is Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and Audubon. And those are really great because they have sounds and sights. It'll start asking you, where did you see the bird? And that's a really important piece too, because habitat has a lot to do with what you'll be able to see. Xenocanto. I think this is one of the best things out there, and I really encourage people to go to this website. People like you and I upload bird songs, and they'll tell you where and when they recorded them. So that's really important because, believe it or not, birds have regional dialects. And I learned that pretty early on. I had CDs that I used for learning my bird calls, and when I heard the Northern Cardinal, it was recorded out in New York State or out east. And that Northern Cardinal didn't sound exactly like my Northern Cardinal, and so I kind of thought it may not be the same bird. But Xenocanto gives you an opportunity to hear several birds calling together, so you can use it like a quiz for yourself, and it also gives you an idea of what other birds are out there so you can learn, and it's free. And again, I say, just get out. That's one of the best things that you can do to get yourself started on this journey. In closing, I really want to thank you so much. You, our members, donors, and friends, inspire us every day. Thank you so, so much for making so much possible and so much helpful. And now I think we're going to take some questions. I would be delighted to hear what's on your mind and do my best to answer it for you. I have some really great winter memories of birding because that's opportunities where you get the wow factor, and there's something that's called or a term that's called a spark bird, and that's actually what kind of gets you on the journey sometimes. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite memories or a question. One of my favorite memories I made actually just a couple of weeks ago. I was out by myself photographing, and I ran into a group of pre-K kids out with their teachers, just out for a walk. And I knew very close to them there was a young red-tailed hawk sitting in a tree. And we got the opportunity to stand on the sidewalk and look at that bird, and it was remarkable. Red tails are awesome anyway, but they're big, and it was really easy to see. So that was something I really hope one of those kids learned about red tails and is going to think birds are so awesome that they're going to want to learn about them for the rest of their lives. So the question I have, and thank you very much, is it appropriate to use bird calls to find birds, or is that not a good idea? I almost feel like you're my audience plant because I love talking about this. I think that it's a great resource for you. I don't tend to use I think the bird will be. The reason for that is kind of like what we referenced a little bit earlier in the talk. that bird isn't going to know that it's you, out there. It's going to think it's another of that species, and it's going to come out and it's going to try to defend its territory. And I know that sometimes, you get the bird out, so you get to see it. But I really would caution that, because if you do that and the next 15 people do that and the next 20 people do that, that is a lot of energy that that bird is using to show itself and try to defend its territory. It's also showing itself, and there may be other predators in the area. So I discourage doing it a lot while you're out, but definitely use calls in your car, in your house, as you're prepping for your trip. Thank you for asking. And I have a new question. Do you think that a lot of birds did not head south this winter due to the warmer temps? Ooh, that's a great question. So birds actually pay very little attention to temperature. The amount of daylight is going to be the trigger for most of the things that they do. Remember, feathers came first for warmth before they came for flight. I absolutely think that there are some birds that I normally don't see in the winter that did stick around this past winter. I have a white-throated sparrow that comes to my feeders every other day. So yes, there are definitely going to be some individuals of a species that decide not to go south for one reason or another. And boy, I tell you, it's, young birds, hatchier birds from last year, they sometimes will be more of the individuals that decide not to head south when others do. Remember, heading south is really on the search for food. You go because your food source where you are is not there any longer. So if you think you can still find food, it's not the cold that's going to make you leave, it's the fact that you don't think that you can find food. And I also want to take this opportunity to again thank US Bank for supporting this series. It's really important that we have groups like that that help us to do this good work and be able to talk to you today. So thank you so much for that. I think it's kind of great that we chose to talk about winter birds today before it gets to be 14 below, because it'll be much harder to have energy and enthusiasm to talk about telling you going outside to bird in the winter when it's going to be that cold. Because even if it's great birds, I'm not going to be outside. Here's a great question. How did I get my start in birding? Wow, that is a super great question. It's kind of a slippery slope. I started out with hawks. I started out with really big stuff. I was very lucky. I got to work with, or I still get to work with folks that do field work. So especially in the fall, we do banding of raptors in fall migration. And that actually expanded to include the little stuff. And so I do that year round with field work and research and just going out and birding and getting to enjoy them. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. How do you feel about window feeders? That's a great question. I have read that putting a window feeder up actually prevents birds from banging into the window. Wow, I really encourage people to do a little reading for themselves to learn about window collisions. BirdSafe is a fantastic project here in Minnesota and other states where it really does talk about what you can do to keep your windows safe from birds. Glass is such an odd thing for birds to think about. You can see through it, but you can't fly through it. And depending on what's nearby, if you have plants, for example, just on the inside of it, they don't know that they can't just fly and land in that plant. Feeders are a great question. Truly, if you kind of think about what birds have to do, they have to slow down to get to the feeder. So when they are just having to slow down to get to that, they're slowing down and not going straight into your window. It's sometimes when your feeders are a little further out from your window, and again, I encourage you to read to get more of the 3 feet, 10 feet to answer this question a little more in depth. It's when you get something that scares them and they're leaving the feeder very quickly that they might end up hitting your window, because now they've had time to build up a little bit of speed. But thank you for asking. And I think this is really great, because now you're not just excited about birds, but you want to help birds. And thank you for doing that. That's really great. And let's see, is there a downside to keeping a feeder? I know sometimes feeding wildlife can be unhealthy for them. Wow, great question. So birds here in Minnesota in particular have really adapted to not having just one of Member Appreciation Month. We have lots of other great stuff to bring your way. Thank you to US Bank for making this possible. And in the meantime, check out our website, smm.org. We've got great resources that are bird related and other, so please take that opportunity. Thank you.